Today, I'm going to be going over all the mistakes made in the backrooms and explain what I would have done better in order to survive. The movie kicks off on June 19th, 1990, with a scientist named Naren Warren, who works for the Async Research Institute. Naren is doing some routine exploration in the freshly opened backrooms dimension when he commits the #1 sin of horror movies. He wanders off and gets completely separated from the rest of his research team. Suddenly, he's isolated in a lonely nightmare of dull yellow wallpaper, buzzing fluorescent lights, endless damp carpet, and glitched out malformed furniture. Instead of staying calm, keeping his back to a wall, or marking his path, Naren starts screaming out for help while walking blindly through identical hallways. Predictably, an unseen screeching entity picks up on his noise, chases him down, and violently attacks him while his camera rolls. Now, let's start with the fun part, which is talking about Naren's performance here, because it was an absolute masterclass in how to get eaten in under 3 minutes. Because, first of all, why on earth are you exploring an unknown reality without a literal rope tied to your waist? If I'm working for Async in 1990, I am not taking a single step into a dimension that defies physics without some sort of backup or protection, as at first glance, this should already look very suspicious. Also, the moment Naren got separated, his instant instinct was to scream at the top of his lungs in a silent void. That is basically ringing a dinner bell for whatever creature is lurking behind the drywall. If I somehow got detached, I would immediately shut my mouth and retrace my physical footprints on that soggy carpet. You shouldn't let panic run deeper into the maze. Instead, you hold your ground, mark the walls with a Sharpie, and let the search team find you. But fast forward to the present day, where we meet our main protagonist, Clark. Now, Clark is a failed architect who now owns a struggling, depressing furniture store, while quietly drowning in alcoholism and a messy divorce. To try to turn his life around, he meets with a therapist named Dr. Mary Klein, who has her own massive batch of unhandled baggage. Mary is dealing with deep trauma that comes from the demolition of her childhood home, not to mention her agoraphobic mother being hospitalized. Meanwhile, Clark is trying to keep his business afloat by recruiting his assistant manager, Kat, and her boyfriend, Bobby, to film a bizarre local TV commercial. The commercial features Clark embarrassingly dressed up as the store's pirate mascot, which tells you pretty much everything you need to know about his mental state. Since Clark is basically living out of his furniture store at this point, he starts noticing super weird stuff happening after hours. The overhead fluorescent lights keep flickering in strange patterns, and his static-heavy television keeps turning on and off by itself. Instead of assuming he has a severe electrical issue and getting real help, Clark decides to go investigate the breaker box in the back of the building, even after seeing a weird, eerie scene of the backrooms on his TV before it would cut out. But tucked away in a dark corner, he spots a bizarre, glowing, vertical slit right in the middle of the drywall. Now, right now, you're probably thinking that he grabbed a flashlight, backed away, or reported it to the city, right? Well, of course not, as he would walk right up to it, lean in way too close, and fall straight through the floor, plummeting directly into the backrooms. Now, let's pause right here, because Clark's survival instincts were already sitting at a solid 0 before he even entered the dimension. If my television starts acting like it's possessed and the lights are flickering, I am not creeping around in the dark alone. And if I see a glowing rip in the fabric of the walls inside my discount couch warehouse, I am certainly not putting my face in it. I would immediately go back upstairs and call for some help. But unfortunately, in the moment, Clark didn't think right, and now he's in some random alternate dimension that definitely looked creepy to him. But once Clark hits the floor in level 0, he immediately finds himself surrounded by the familiar, eerie yellow room. But during all of this, he notices that he can literally go through the wall, and for a brief second, he's back at the room in his store. However, for some dumb reason, he decides to go back in these creepy backrooms to, I guess, explore, which was just the dumbest mistake in the movie. And I don't even need to say why, as it's pretty clear. As he stumbles through the damp corridors, he actually stumbles upon the abandoned belongings left behind by Naren back in 1990. But before he can even process what he's looking at, an unseen entity begins emitting horrifying sounds and eventually closes in on his position. Clark panics and sprints blindly through the halls, miraculously managing to find the wall slit he fell through and throwing himself back into his store. He makes it out alive, but what he doesn't realize is that an async scientist named Phil was watching his entire frantic escape through a hidden surveillance camera feed. Now, we have to give Clark credit where credit is due, because Clark actually managed to survive his first encounter, which is more than most horror movie characters can say, but his post-escape behavior was an absolute disaster. Because if I clipped into an alternate dimension, found a dead guy's bag, and got chased out by a sound monster, I would immediately shut down the furniture store, because I am not sleeping in that building another night, and I'm definitely not keeping the portal open while I figure out my life. In addition, if I suspected anyone was watching me, like Phil on the security monitors, I'd be scanning every inch of the ceiling for hidden cameras. The play here was to lock down the perimeter, document the exact area the wall tear was at, and prepare proper gear before even thinking about going back to this weird place. But instead of getting professional help or running as far away as possible, Clark decides to spend the next several days secretly exploring the backrooms on his own. He eventually tells his therapist Mary about the infinite yellow maze, but she naturally treats it as a psychotic delusion. Realizing he desperately needs concrete proof to convince her and the world, Clark decides to put together an exploration team. He recruits his store employee Kat and her boyfriend Bobby, handing them a video camera to film their discoveries. He leads these two completely untrained civilians right through the glowing wall slit and straight into the dead zone without a single piece of safety equipment. Now, this is officially the moment where Clark becomes the worst boss in movie history, because you do not drag your minimum wage assistant manager and her boyfriend into a weird, creepy, alternate universe just to prove a point to your therapist. If I needed proof for a therapist, I would simply stick my arm through the wall slit with a smartphone, record 10 seconds of footage, and pull my arm back out. I certainly wouldn't lead two clueless people into a weird hazard zone dressed in street clothes with zero weapons, zero supplies, and no emergency contacts. And if I were Kat or Bobby, the second my boss says, "Hey, step into this glowing wall void," I would have handed in my 2 weeks notice on the spot. Predictably though, the exploration goes off the rails almost immediately once the trio enters deeper into the backrooms. While exploring a sloped, unnerving corridor, the group makes the fatal mistake of sending Bobby down the corridor to explore, and out of nowhere, an unseen entity ambushes him from the shadows, lunging at Bobby and violently dragging him down the corridor into the darkness. Instead of retreating to the entry point to preserve their lives though, a frantic Clark and Kat make the insane decision to start running around instead of escaping. They sprint through a chaotic maze of turning hallways, and inevitably get separated from each other. Now, Bobby's first big mistake was walking down a sloped corridor in a dimension known for shifting gravity without checking his footing or his rear guard. In the backrooms, choke points and steep areas are death traps because they limit your escape routes. When Bobby got taken, as cold as it sounds, Clark and Kat's survival odds dropped to 0 the moment they ran deeper into the dark. Chasing a monster that just insta-killed your buddy into unknown terrain is absolute suicide. And if I'm in Clark's shoes, the moment Bobby disappears, I grab Kat, deploy a loud noise of some sort down the hallway, and initiate an escape toward our known exit. You cannot save someone from an entity if you don't know what the entity is made of. But now separated, Clark is wandering alone with the heavy video camera while Kat desperately searches for him in adjacent corridors. Clark ends up trapped in a dead-end hallway when two horrific entities suddenly emerge and corner him. Kat actually manages to find him, but they are separated by a one-way dimensional barrier wall where she can see and hear him, but he can only see his own reflection. Panicking completely, Clark makes the stupid decision to set the video camera down on the floor facing away from him. As Kat screams through the glass-like wall for Clark to look behind him, one of the entities calmly walks up, picks up the running camera, and stares directly into the lens as Clark's fate is sealed. Now, all I can say at this point is I'm disappointed, as Clark violated basic spatial awareness in every possible way. Rule number 1 when cornered by entities: never, under any circumstances, set down your primary light source or camera to look at a dead wall. If I find myself staring at a dead end with creatures closing in, I am pressing my back flush against that wall so nothing can get behind me. I'm keeping my eyes fixed on the threats, holding my camera at chest level and looking for any way to escape via the drywalls. Furthermore, if you are separated separated by a one-way wall, you don't stand there staring at your reflection like a lost puppy. You use your 5 senses to figure out a way to survive and escape, and not point your back towards the monsters. Sometime later though, back in the real world, Dr. Mary Klein receives a creepy, unsettling answering machine message from Clark. In the recording, Clark's voice sounds completely broken as he informs her that he's decided to permanently stay in the backrooms and will not be returning. Meanwhile, Async researcher Phil is at home watching television with his family when a local commercial for Clark's furniture store pops up on the screen. Phil instantly recognizes Clark from the security footage he watched earlier and realizes the situation is spiraling out of control. Deeply concerned for her patient's safety though, Mary goes to investigate the empty furniture store, discovers the glowing doorway in the back, and unbelievably walks straight inside all by herself. As we all know, Mary is a licensed mental health professional, but her survival logic here was somehow worse than Clark's. If your patient leaves a rambling voicemail saying he's living in an alternate universe, you do not launch a solo rescue mission into his creepy abandoned store. You call the police, report a missing person, or at the very least, bring a partner and a flashlight. Walking into an active spatial anomaly completely unannounced, wearing nothing but casual clothes and carrying zero gear is how people end up on missing persons posters. If I were Mary, I would have stood outside the store, taken photos of the breach, called emergency services, and waited for real help. Shortly after entering the yellow corridors, Mary encounters Clark, but he is completely unrecognizable, as he has gone entirely psychotic from long exposure to the dimension's psychological pressure and the liminal environment. Hearing the distinct sounds of an entity approaching in the distance, Clark panics, grabs Mary, and chokes her until she loses consciousness to keep her silent. When Mary finally wakes up, she finds herself duct taped to a chair in a surreal and off-putting dining room space deep inside the complex. Sitting around the table with them are 3 creepy, completely static human figures that look like living statues. Clark casually demonstrates to a terrified Mary that these fake humans, known as still lives, are actually made of a bizarre, edible, white chalky substance. To make matters infinitely more horrifying, Clark opens up a nearby visual prop refrigerator and shows Kat's severed head sitting on a shelf. Clark calmly demands that Mary proceed with their scheduled therapy session right then and there. Instead of playing along to keep herself alive, Mary aggressively scolds Clark, tearing into his personal failures and telling him that his wife left him because he never takes responsibility for his life. Now, this entire sequence is a masterclass in how not to handle a hostage situation with a crazy guy. First off, Clark choking Mary out was a terrible move on his part because loud scuffles attract entities way faster than quiet whispering. But Mary's response upon waking up tied to a chair was equally terrible. When a guy who is keeping a severed head in a fridge invites you to a pretend dinner party with chalk people, you do not roast his failed marriage. That is the absolute worst time to play the tough love therapist card. If I wake up tied to that chair, I am instantly adopting the most supportive, agreeable personality imaginable, even if it's not the truth, as getting on his good side is the best decision possible. But thankfully, Mary got lucky, and Clark didn't go crazy because of this, as Clark would start to feel remorse from Mary's lecture and begin untying her ropes. However, soon after, the quiet is shattered by a terrifying noise. A massive, towering, heavily distorted entity enters the room, an unsettling monster resembling Clark's pirate store mascot. Clark, still completely delusional, walks right up to the giant pirate abomination and attempts to speak softly to calm it down. However, the pirate monster doesn't care about his feelings at all, as it instantly snaps forward, biting Clark to death in a gruesome flash. Now, Clark's death is perhaps the single dumbest moment in the entire movie, and that is saying a whole lot, because you cannot reason with a messed up twisted monster based off of your own localized trauma dressed as a budget pirate. If a 12-foot tall distorted mascot monster walks into the room, you don't approach it with open arms like you're greeting a stray puppy. You put physical obstacles between yourself and the creature instantly. If I were Clark, the moment that thing rounded the corner, I would have thrown a chair at its knees, grabbed Mary, and sprinted in the opposite direction. Trying to calm down an apex predator in the backrooms will get you eaten every single time no matter what. With Clark dead on the floor, Mary manages to break free from her chair and takes off running for her life. The towering pirate monster gives relentless chase, pursuing her through an increasingly chaotic, dreamlike sequence of surreal, folding spaces. Mary runs until she stumbles into a deeply flawed, glitched out replica of Clark's furniture store embedded inside the complex. She manages to break the monster's leg with a lamp, but this doesn't stop the monster, as it eventually corners Mary against a display wall, and with nowhere left to run, Mary reaches into her bag and pulls out a literal chunk of concrete, a piece she had kept from the recent demolition of her childhood home. As the pirate entity lunges in for the kill, Mary screams and brutally bashes in the monster's face with the heavy concrete chunk. Honestly, huge respect to Mary for actually fighting back here, because using blunt force against a soft, chalky monster is actually brilliant. However, her overall escape strategy was completely chaotic. Running aimlessly through shifting geometry without picking up sharp objects or heavy props along the way is a huge gamble, because if I'm being chased through a simulated furniture store, I am knocking over heavy wardrobes, breaking table legs off to use as spears, and creating massive bottlenecks in every doorway. Also, carrying a heavy piece of sentimental concrete around in your purse for emotional reasons is understandable in a way. But hey, it turned out to be the ultimate improvised weapon, because if you're stuck in the backrooms, anything dense enough to fracture drywall or smash an entity's head in is your best friend. The violent struggle between Mary and the pirate monster accidentally triggers a hidden async industrial gas trap installed in the ceiling. Knockout gas floods the room, subduing the disoriented monster and knocking Mary unconscious once again. A tactical team of async researchers wearing full yellow hazmat suits rushes into the room, secures the entity, and drags Mary out of the anomaly. She wakes up inside a high-security async research facility, sitting in a cold interrogation room across from Phil. Phil explains the mind-blowing background of Async. Basically, they originally manufactured MRI machines until they accidentally stumbled upon the backrooms, which quickly became their entire secret focus. When Phil asks Mary what she saw in there and how she found it, she echoes Clark's chilling description and mentions how she found the backrooms from the furniture store. Mary desperately asks if Async is going to let her return home, but Phil gives her a grim look and admits that the decision is completely out of his hands. Now, let's talk about how to handle the post-escape async interrogation. Mary played it super passive, basically acting like a helpless victim waiting for permission to leave. If I get rescued by a shady corporation that installs secret gas traps in altered dimensions, I know right away I'm in extreme danger of being silenced. The play here is to establish some sort of leverage immediately in order for Async to let you go. Even if it's a total bluff, you have to convince a black budget research film that keeping you alive and letting you go is safer than making you disappear. Sitting quietly and hoping a corporation shows mercy is a terrible survival plan. But the movie ends with us seeing a bunch of shots of different rooms that are in the backrooms. And honestly, looking back at everything, this could have been all easily avoided if Clark got rid of his curiosity. Just think about it. If bro never went to the backrooms and shut down this store right after he saw the backrooms, he would probably be alive right now, doing better than he was before. However, at the end of the day, things like these are the horror movie special, which is why you should consider subscribing, as I analyze horror movie mistakes like these all the time.